what you're doing, you know. Well, we're just chatting here, folks. Like, I'm gonna let you guys file in, and then we'll get into it, man. You know. But yeah,
Yeah, a lot of the way we see Latin America and the US is kind of abstract,
mhm,
like everybody knows the US medals and stuff. Everybody knows that there's US involvement here and there, but nobody really gets into the details about it. And, when you start digging in, you start seeing different patterns and, you know, different techniques all being used against different they spread around.
yeah. Well, and and that's the it. Like, I kind of fell into a little bit about my background. I fell into studying a little bit about what America did in South America, sort of ass backwards, right? Like, I studied foreign policy or world history in when I was a grad student. I was wanting to go into work for the government. I was going to be a security analyst in the Department of the Navy, and eventually I was even thinking about taking the foreign service officer exam and all that other stuff. And so I studied the Taft administration under in China, when like the open door, and when that opened up and America's becoming an imperial power. And there was a speech that Taft gave where he was talking about the success of dollar diplomacy, which was a failure in another way. Like, it didn't work in China because
Right.
they're getting into that colonial game, and it wasn't working for the Americans. But they basically had almost a free hand at that time in South America. So I read about the incubator that Taft did in Nicaragua, and and it was just kind of amazing to me, where I was reading about, like, okay, so they're backing American companies to go in, and then if the government that they're kind of basically strong arming doesn't agree to pay them, then the American military is going to step in and basically either depose a person or make them pay. And I went, wow, we're still doing this like 100 years
Right.
later. Like, nothing's really changed in South America. And
Right.
that's kind of like the scales that when they fell from my eyes, was that moment. Is and it and I thought to myself, I was like, well, if I'm studying foreign policy and I don't know this, like, the average American almost has no hope, like, to really understand this, because, as to your point, it's not talked about a lot,
Right.
you know. We're all front loaded with this colonial mindset of, like, you know, like, oh, well, we're going down there to stop communism and dictatorships, and we're the liberators. How are Americans kind of viewed in South America and in your experience?
Well, and like Americans, like the population, not really in a negative way. Obviously there's the jokes and the stereotypes and stuff because of travelers and stuff. Like,
Right.
everybody always says you could spot an American a mile away based on how people walk, like our gait.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's stuff like that. But when you get into like government stuff, our government, their government, you get into the history, in Latin America, all of this stuff is well known, right? Because it's happened to every country, nearly every country
Yeah.
at some point. So each country has its own history and they often relate that history to their neighbors. So there's a general but broader sense of anti-imperialism in
Mm.
Latin America just because of that knowledge. Um, and there's a bit of a anti-colonialist thing. The colonialism thing isn't as big of a problem because they don't see themselves as being colonized. They see themselves as being manipulated,
Mm.
having their governments overthrown and installing what puppet dictators that, bow to US corporate interests, to US politicians, things like that. So, they see this sort of, I call it dominion because a lot of it is focused on like Christian nationalism and
Mm.
always kind of has been. And it's this view of like where the US wants to have dominion over Latin America, its resources, almost in a sense like the US feels like it deserves a cut of whatever's down there.
Yeah.
And before Venezuela nationalized its oil in like 1976, for example, I think the country was reaping maybe 10 or 15% of the oil revenues as a benefit, while the oil companies in the US were taking the rest. So,
Right.
you get into those things and it becomes a little bit more complex when you talk about it compared to how we see it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, because I think the misnomer that we have, like we have this, and we're kind of taught this way in, in survey classes in school and middle school and high school is that, oh, we're going to bring civilization, right?
Yeah.
Like we're gonna bring like we're like and even in the language Trump uses now, it's like, oh, we're gonna fix the country, we're gonna upgrade the infrastructure, we're gonna do
Right,
all that,
right.
right? And that sounds good where it's like, well, they're getting all this stuff. Why would they be upset? But really, to your point, it's like when you really dig into it, it's really an extraction model. They're taking most of the wealth out of the country, right? And so, Venezuela, for instance, before they nationalized in the 70s, gets 10 to 15% if they're lucky. And if that happened to us, right, which it does technically with our own corporations, but let's say, Russia or somebody came in here and started a business and they're like, yeah, they took 85% of the wealth out of the country and we're left to deal with all the pollution, the problems,
Right,
the things that are going, we'd be furious.
right.
And I think that that gets lost in the sort of in the messaging that comes to Americans, right? It's like, I guess they just don't like freedom and
Yeah,
capitalism,
right, right.
you know. But it's like, no, it's that's where that's the colonial part of it, right? That's the mercantilism that we lived under and supposedly rebelled over, right?
Right, right. And, there's this, perception of, bringing civilization, right? That's been a thing since the colonization of the US, right? They're bringing
Mhm.
civilization to the savages.
Right.
Um, but, you look at Latin America and, these supposed third world countries, Bernie Sanders likes to refer to all the economically developed countries. Look at all these other countries like us that have healthcare for their people. But you look in Latin America and these so-called third world countries, they all have healthcare for their people too.
Right.
Um, right. Like I think it's Uruguay has the best healthcare. That's like the richest country in Latin America.
Mm.
Paraguay is run by a far right government, right wing government. They have healthcare for their people. So it's not like this divisive political issue in Latin America. It's almost like, they understand that not paying for healthcare puts money back into the economy, has people spending, things like that. So it's this weird thing where, like, if, you cross the border from the US to Mexico and you're almost in another dimension, you know what I
Yep.
mean? Where there's everybody has healthcare and stuff and education and all that, and you're just like, "Wait, I just left the richest country in the land, but you guys have this?" And
Right.
yeah, it's weird. It's kind of weird to see it that way when, you think you're bringing democracy or you think you're bringing civilization to these places where they have all these social programs that benefit society. It's just crazy to think that.
Well, and because we've just gotten so accepted, like we've accepted
Right.
our position and our exploitation. Like we've said, oh, okay, well then obviously this must be the best because we're doing it. Even though if we actually step back and look at it, we're like, well, wait a minute, no. And it's that kind of brings me to like Venezuela, where there's this perception that uh not Machado, but the president they kidnapped. God, I'm blank. Why am I blanking on? They both
Oh,
start with
Maduro. Yeah.
Maduro. Yeah,
Mm.
that he was this strong man, and that he was oppressing the people, and so that's the image we were sold. Um, how does that actually jive up with how it is on the ground, like with Venezuelans, right?
Well, let me start by saying that I'm not necessarily a fan of Maduro, right?
Right.
I'm not. I don't know. But at the end of the day, the thing about my opinion of Maduro is it doesn't matter, right? Because I don't have to deal with the guy. He's not my problem. Um, but when you look at a lot of the stuff people cite on the internet, and the one that kills me is they say that he killed 20,000 people
Right.
since he's been in power, and those 20,000 deaths are over, I don't know, 10, 11-year period or something, and those are extrajudicial murders, right? Police brutality type situation. Um, and, when you do the numbers for us in the same time period, I think I did this for an article. In the same time period that they claim Maduro killed 20,000 people, we killed like close to 14,000. The difference is we don't blame our president, right?
Right.
We blame the cop, we blame the system, we blame everything that we should be blaming. But when you look at the propaganda aspect of it, it switches up when it comes to other countries.
Right.
And if there's an, extrajudicial murder problem with your police forces in your country, they automatically associate those with it's the president's fault. We need to get rid of him. Look what he's doing. Maduro isn't necessarily a great guy. And I don't doubt he's involved in some stuff all world leaders are, right? I mean, look at
Right.
ours. Look at ours, right? Um, Anything Maduro did is a drop in the bucket compared to Trump, that's for sure. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's just not what they say it is. The Washington office on Latin America did a report in 2020 or 2022 about the US sanctions.
Mm.
And one of the things they pointed out, and this always struck me, is that when Chavez took over, in the 14 years he was in power, I shouldn't say took over. He was duly elected. I
Right.
need to stop saying take over because he was elected over and over again by a huge margin. Um, but when Chavez was in power, I think 1.5 million people in 14 years left the country. When the
Mm.
2017 sanctions hit that Trump imposed, the maximum pressure sanctions, he put them on Cuba and Nicaragua too. The migration rate out of Venezuela ballooned from 100,000 a year average to close to 2 million in a
Mhm.
year.
Yeah.
So, you know, and this uh, to go a little off subject, this drives me nuts about Democrats because Trump caused the mass migration out of Venezuela, which in the process led to the migration crisis at our border
Right.
and created all these problems that Biden inherited, and no one is using that. And
No.
yeah, it blows me away. But anyway, yeah, and then you look at the numbers, and Colombia took in like 2 million. I think Argentina took in like 2 million or something. I mean, the numbers were crazy, but the U.S. only took in like 18%. I say only, that's still a lot, but a lot of these far right weirdos will tell you that they all came here. Why are they all coming here? They're not, obviously. Um, because the way I see it is, why are you going to come to a country that doesn't have universal health care when you can park it right next door where they do have it? Um,
And potentially speak the same language and have a
yeah,
similar
right. In Colombia,
culture.
right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, there's a lot
And
of cultural similarities too between Colombia and Venezuela. So
yeah, it would basically it's like it'd be the difference between like, me emigrating to, if I had to Canada, versus like, trucking my ass all the way down to Belize, you know?
right, yeah,
Yeah, it's like, well, they kind of speak English there. It's like I should be okay, or it's like, all right, but the culture shock is going to be that much
right,
more
right.
intense. And I don't know. I mean, I think I'm not very bullish on Democrats these days. I mean, I've got so far as to become an independent, and I think my guess is just they they seem to accept a lot of right wing framing on these issues, right? Instead of, to your point, going to the American people, it's like, no, we've done this because, or this is happening is because this is what the Trump administration did in South America and with all this disruption, you know. And I guess there's some, if I had these class of consultants that have said, well, then they'll peg you with communism and socialism, and people vote against you, and it's like,
Yeah,
but then that's why we're having this conversation, is because
right.
most people are just, they think of it's like Maduro is strongman, right? And then Macha,
He's act he's actually kind of a pushover.
right, yeah,
Yeah. like he gave in to US oil interests. Like he's been offering them contracts to come and extract oil for like 4 or 5 years now.
Yep.
And rumor has it that a lot of the deals Delcy Rodriguez is offering, the interim president right now, are the same deals that Maduro was offering. It's just Trump is taking credit like, "Hey, look what I accomplished."
Right.
And it was stuff already on the table.
Right.
Yeah, it's
You
weird.
know, because that's, I mean, that's what he does best. What was it? Machado, if I'm saying her name right, came and gave him, her Nobel Peace Prize, right?
Yeah,
And the ultimate, like, pick me. But even then, that's the problem, is like we see, like, she's presented to us as like this is some democratic freedom fighter, that won the election overwhelmingly, and then the strong man pushed her out of power. And it's like, yeah, but she's more of just kind like what they're not telling you is like, no, she's more far right and just, wants to basically hand the country over to foreign corporate interests, right?
yeah,
It has nothing to do with benefiting the lives of the people, you know, but
right.
absolutely. Right. And
Yeah.
God,
No, yeah, Machado is definitely far right. She doesn't say white Christian nationalist things or anything like that, doesn't even come close, but she does associate with white Christian nationalist groups in Europe and Latin America. One of her higher ranking people in her opposition party is in Spain,
mhm,
and that's where he lives now. And just saw a report recently where he was doing some stuff with Nazis, and I was like,
of course.
"Jesus Christ, dude!" Like, and like they don't really hide it, and it blows me away. So the thing with Machado, right? So everybody in Venezuela, she's getting roasted for bowing to Trump and groveling. She's getting it. But what Trump did to her is what's expected. What I try to tell Latinos, like you align yourself with these racists, they're going to throw you under the bus the minute
Mhm.
they don't need you anymore.
Oh yeah.
Trump doesn't need her anymore. He kidnapped Maduro. He's, trying to steal Venezuela's oil. So she's not a useful tool if he's
No.
already getting access. So, but yeah,
Right.
her thing is she wants to get rid of the Venezuelan constitution. And that's what people refer to as Chavismo, after Chavez, because that's the constitution that came in when he was in power. And it grants a lot of rights to Black Venezuelans and indigenous Venezuelans, and they're codified into law.
Mhm.
And, when he took power and all that stuff, one of the reasons people left was because of that.
Yeah.
And in the 2002 coup where they tried to overthrow him, and she was in the presidential palace after I can't remember his name off the top of my head. He tried to take over. That's the first thing they did was they abolished the constitution. So yeah, she's a wild one. She's definitely not liberal, so
No. No.
yeah.
What I was explaining to a friend of mine, like and what a lot of folks, like their misunderstanding of history is that, so Spanish and Portuguese that came over in South America were European, right? And they like we as racist white folks look at them and say, oh well, they're brown and they're black, but it's like they didn't consider themselves that, and they, just like us with slavery in America, where you had different classifications of how much black blood you had,
Right.
mulatto, octoroon, all that, they had their classifications in South America and Mexico and everything else. Like, could you trace your ancestry back to Spain, right?
Yeah.
And so, the racism that happened there against like indigenous folks and, people of color, and it's and so it's not surprising to see the folks like Machado who are like, no, we want to strip them of their rights, just like racist white folks in this country want to do the same to people of color, trans folks, LGBTQ women. It's kind of the same thing. What floors me is folks that know who we are, and it's and is that come up here and it's like, you know, well, we're white. It's like, yeah, not according to people that look like me, you're not.
Right.
You know,
Like me,
no,
I've been told, "Oh, well, you're not white white." I'm like, what the fuck is that? I have to have 2
Right.
whites? What the hell? Like,
Yeah.
that doesn't make any sense, bro. I mean, because I'm Cuban and I speak Spanish, I'm not white? Like, what the hell?
Yeah. I
It
mean,
doesn't make any
it's
sense.
well, there was a thing that happened. This was a while ago. This must have been a year or two. And like, so, uh, was it Marjorie Taylor Greene said, when they were pushing for that, and you see this pop up every once in a while where JD Vance recently said, you don't have to apologize for being white anymore.
Oh my god.
Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene got her handbook went too far back and she said, we should be proud of Anglo-Saxon heritage. And I went, wow, that is an old racist thing because that is before Irish and Italians got included into whiteness
Right,
because,
right.
like, and so it was that, and then she backed off of that because I think she got the memo and it's like, hey,
Yeah,
like, no, we don't do that racism anymore, right? We've included these other groups for the time being, into this race. But make no mistake, it's like if you're Cuban to the Anglo-Saxon Protestants,
right,
you're not white.
right.
If
It
you're
makes no
Italian,
sense.
you're not white.
Right.
Like,
True,
no,
true.
deep in
Yeah,
their heart of hearts, they still carry that around, right?
yeah.
If you have a Spanish surname, you're
Right,
yeah, you're not white. And that's why white supremacy, like you can't support white supremacy because it will get smaller and smaller and smaller, right? Until
right.
there's barely anybody left. And eventually they'll oppress the poor white folks. And, I mean, Elon Musk and Peter Thiel are already talking about it, right? The Dark
Right,
Enlightenment is basically the logical conclusion of white nationalism.
right.
Like that's what it is. And so, it just, yeah, man. I mean, but it floors me just the misunderstandings that we all kind of have with South America because there is this notion of like, again, we hear, oh, it's a third world country. Oh, it's underdeveloped or it's this or it's that. And it's like, but if you've traveled there, you're like, no, it's actually rich in history and it's got infrastructure. It's got all these things, right?
Right.
And in some ways it's better than what we have.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the 2 cities in particular in Venezuela that always stood out to me, it's Maracaibo and Caracas, right? Caracas.
Mm,
Those are amazing cities. I mean,
yeah.
the metro's like 50 cents, you know what I mean? And you ride that thing anywhere. It's just it's a really nice looking city. And sure, Venezuela does have some serious issues with inflation and poverty and things like that. But again, you look at the sanctions policies and the effects
Yeah.
that they have, and that's where it comes from.
Right.
Um, it just one of the things that drives me nuts is, with Venezuela and Cuba, for example, essentially what the United States is saying is that Venezuelans and Cubans are too stupid to decide their own future, to
Right.
decide how they should be governed. Um, democracy looks different depending on where you go.
Hmm.
In Venezuela, you might think Maduro stole that election. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But almost everything that happens in Venezuela happens by referendum.
Hmm.
So they have community groups. So Venezuela is not communist, but it's built almost like communist, where you have these community groups, a lot of unions, and for example, a recent referendum in I think it was December had to do with farmers, and basically they get together in their communities and they determine how they want their federal dollars coming from the government spent, and then those voices are then heard up the line, and in the end there was like 15,000 referendums that were being voted on, but you had a few that were dedicated to each specific community, and each specific community gets to decide how their money's spent. Like if they feel like they need more for healthcare in rural areas, that's where they'll spend it.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of these things like, again, it looks different over there. Democracy does. Cuba's the same way. When they passed the Family Code bill in 2020 and it codified LGBTQ rights, right? Gay marriage, trans rights, all these things. The entire country voted on it.
Yeah.
And, they say Cuba's a one party system, and it sort of is. They're communist, all of them. But it's not like all their views are the same. They
Right.
very you have conservative type of people who were against adding any rights to the LGBTQ community for the community. So they decided to let the people vote, and like 80% voted for it. So
Right. We're like,
that
okay,
passed.
well,
You can't argue with that kind of stuff. So,
and
some people are okay with that. I don't know. It just looks different.
yeah, and I think a big part of that is our propaganda and the where
Well,
it's
yeah,
been
yeah.
done. Yeah, where it's been done for a long time. So like even now, like we hear the word, it's getting less and less because of what the right has done with the word communist and socialist. Right? They've thrown that against everybody. So it loses its meaning. But like for a lot of people, when they hear the word communist, they think big C communism, they think the Soviet Union.
Right,
And that's, it's 30 years plus gone. But, even Vietnam, you look at that, it's like, okay, yeah, they were communists, but they modeled their constitution and their government off of us, right?
right,
Because Ho Chi Minh had studied in the United States and he was a big fan of the founding fathers. And
right,
when they rebelled against, French colonialism and ratified their constitution, which for Ho Chi Minh was like a mix of, sort of Leninism and the founding fathers in this hybrid of what Vietnam created. They went to the US and said, "Hey, we did this and we're with you." And they're like, "But you're communist, so we're gonna attack you."
right.
Right. And I think you still kind of get that from, it's and that's why this I think the propaganda in the US is so effective is there is no nuance. You hear, "Oh, it's communism," or it's Latin America. It's like and there's this image that's conjured up in Americans' minds, and they're like, "Well, yeah, we have to go in and help those poor people." Yeah, but it's like, no, I think they're doing fine on their own. I think they're doing
Yeah,
okay. You know, you like, the people that are screwing things up were given $40 billion in Argentina. Like that's
right.
yeah. That's the thing. It's like, but they're helping corporate interests. So like, yeah, we're going to give the money to them first, and then maybe 10% of that's actually going to trickle to the Argentinians. Maybe, uh,
Yeah. Yeah, it's just interesting, I don't know. I think because of how much communism and socialism gets thrown around in our discourse, it's sort of normalized it.
yeah,
And I think more and more people, because I bet you don't know what communism is. Maybe 1 in 100 of those people looked up what it is, and now for some reason socialism is gaining in popularity. You know what I mean? I don't know. I don't know what
what,
you.
dude? You tell me, you say like, wait, 50 cents for the train in Caracas, and it
Yeah,
goes anywhere?
yeah.
Okay, I'm in. Like,
Yeah, because
you know,
they pay for operational costs,
yeah,
which includes salaries and jobs and all that stuff. So, and I always use our power grid as an example because, like, taxpayers, we build the power grid, right? And then we give it to private companies who charge us to access it. And not only do we have to pay for maintenance and upgrades when they add extra to our bill, because here in Texas, that's what they do. We need to
yeah, yeah,
upgrade the system, so we're gonna add a dollar or 2 to your bill for the next 18 months, and they'll rake in a couple billion bucks. And, the thing is there's a profit motive in between, right? So,
yeah,
now we pay, ridiculous amounts of money because somebody's put money in their pocket for something we built.
right.
It's the same thing with toll roads. It's the same thing with our water system. And when you
Yep.
look at it like that, you understand why some things probably should be nationalized, or
Yeah, no,
e
I made this argument,
at least on a local level or something.
yeah, no, I made this argument, like, so you look at the internet, right? Like, all this AI and everything else that's going on. Well, that was, like, created by the Department of Defense and DARPA and all that other and those initiatives. That's a federal tax dollars,
Yeah, we pay
right?
for it.
That we our grandparents paid for that
Right, right, right.
As American citizens, and we haven't been paid back for that, so it's like, "Okay, Facebook, I want the American citizens, we want our cut," right?
Right.
X with Elon Musk says he wants to buy an elect. Okay, we want our cut. You know,
Instead, we have to pay to access those things.
right? And so you go. It's like we want our cut. Like we the American citizens want our cut, and we want. And so yeah, you don't have to call it nationalizing, but we want our cut, and want you to pay back what money we
Right.
invested in the
Right.
form. Let's just say we want it in the form of taxes, to where you have to pay something.
Right. Like, yeah, if we charged internet providers a penny for every account a year, they could pay that back, and I don't
Right.
know, maybe we could use that for education or healthcare. Who knows, right? Like
Or
there's
something. And the funny thing
right.
is, if you say it like that, people go, "Yeah, that seems fair." But the moment you say we should nationalize oh my god, it's communism, we can't do
Yeah,
it. But I basically just said kind of the same thing,
right.
right? I
Right.
basically just said same thing. It's like, "Hey, we built this with public money. You didn't pay for it or give us back that cost." It's like even NFL stadiums. Like,
Yeah, right.
they get a $1 billion two billions of dollars of bond issue that the city pays for, and then you don't get access to it unless you pay even more money to park and to pay for season tickets and everything else. It's like,
Yeah,
yeah, but should you have to pay for that? Like,
right.
we literally put up $2 billion. Shouldn't we be able to park for free?
Like we
At
just
least.
in Houston, we just repaid some bonds for the Astrodome. Man, we haven't
What?
used that thing in 20 years. Not
Wow.
not nothing. It's a big rat box right now. Like they're trying to decide what to do with it. Like we just paid off like $200 million worth of bonds on that thing, and it's like just sits there. So yeah,
Right,
it's
and
it's
yeah.
ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's how we get sold these bills of goods, not only in our foreign policy, but in the political decisions that are made, where it's just like, "Oh, no, like, well, we have to let the rich make even more money. Well, we had to kidnap Maduro." It's like, "But why though?
Mm. Yeah, right. Right.
Why did we have to kidnap him and his
Well,
wife?"
originally it was because of drugs, but now it's because of oil. So, he was dictator, then he was drug facilitator, then he was drug smuggler, then he was the head of a cartel that doesn't exist, and now it's about oil. So, like, I mean, I don't know, in a
You
year,
mean the
right?
oil that he wanted to sell us anyway?
Right, right, and like, I don't know, I feel like and I say this often because in, like, 11 months, the White House basically called everything they've ever said about Venezuela into question, because they
Yeah,
showed us how quickly and easily they can manipulate a narrative, manipulate their intelligence agencies to agree with them, and then go kidnap the guy. They just
right.
showed us how they do it in 10 months. You know what I mean? So it's crazy. Just the incompetence of the White House just blows me away, but sometimes I'm glad for their stupidity.
I mean, I'll be honest, man, like, that's kinda where I'm torn with this whole Trump thing because, the argument I always make about Trump is, like, he's not brilliant, he's just brazen, and what you're
Yeah.
seeing is, like, a lot of weak and feckless opposition leaders who just don't wanna stand up to him, and but because he is so brazen, it's calling into question, like, things that would've like, you look at the run up to Iraq with George W. Bush and what and I at the time, I thought, "That's bullshit." Like, this is it actually was Iraq was the thing that got me politically active because I served in the military, in the reserves, hurt my knees, but I'm like, "I don't care about politics, like, I can't be bothered." And then I was out, and then my unit was getting called up to go into Iraq, and I was like, "Wait a minute, they're gonna go over a lie. I potentially am gonna have friends die over a lie. Now screw this." Like, I'm getting involved, I'm getting more politically active, and, I'm gonna start, studying and researching this stuff. You look at the lies that they sold and all the work they did to get the coalition of willing and everything else, blah, 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 versus now.
Yeah.
It's it's
Yeah.
just like, you know,
I mean,
it's mind-boggling. Like, I thought the Bush regime was bad at it.
yeah.
This is like, they make them look like, a master class. I'm like, I don't know, like, wow.
Yeah, when I don't know, growing up, I grew up, in the inner city in Union City, New Jersey, and, it's a pretty diverse community, and I heard a lot of stuff that, you normally wouldn't have heard about otherwise. My parents were immigrants, so they didn't understand how racism and stuff worked in the United States, but,
Yeah.
all my black friends from school taught me all that stuff. And then, as I got older, you just start seeing things. And like, I remember hearing all these conversations about the Vietnam War and, the Gulf of Tonkin and all that stuff, how we lied about it. And then when 9/11 happened and all that stuff that Bush was doing, and like, I mean, you're right that they were better at it, even though it was terrible. At least they
Right.
had props, right? They brought props to Congress to be like, look, we have this and this and this, what
Colin
infographic.
Powell before the UN with the little anthrax bottle or
Yeah,
whatever
the
he was
little,
in.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, but I mean, most of us saw that it was a lie. The White House knew that it was a lie. And
Right.
just like today, the White House knew that we knew it was a lie. But and just like today, when you don't support them going to war, all of a sudden we're terrorist sympathizers, right? Because we don't support going to war. Just like when you try to clap back on some of this misinformation about Venezuela, all of a sudden I'm
Mhm.
supporting a dictator. And like that's the only pushback they have, right?
Right.
And it's like, dude, no, when did I say I support that guy? I don't even like the guy. Like, like what's it got to do with me?
Right.
Um, yeah, and it's just so crazy because this time around, it's just so out in the open about how they do it, what they, I mean, Trump told us the CIA was in Venezuela. I'm like, good job, you just put a mark on every one of them. Like what are you doing? Like, come on, dude. Like, but yeah, I mean, they showed the world how we do it. They showed Americans how we do it, here at home.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and yeah, much more blatant than Bush. I mean, Bush tried to be methodical about it.
Yeah, I mean, like, his handler would I mean, it's my opinion, but his handler, Dick Cheney,
Dick Cheney.
and I
Yeah.
yeah, with, Halliburton, who wanted that oil in Iraq and, wanted to get their stock price up, and that was kinda the it's like, "All right, and they're trying to run the playbook again, and it turns out the oil companies were like, "Nah, we're good.
Yeah.
We don't wanna go in there," and
Yeah, and Politico reported, I don't know, I think it was a couple of weeks before Trump had that meeting with the oil people, the oil execs, and, Politico reported that they had asked oil companies
Mhm,
if they wanted to go in, and most of them said no, and a lot of them were reluctant, and their biggest hesitation was that they don't think overthrowing the government is gonna hold, that, basically Venezuela is just gonna go right back to being this little socialist little utopia that's over there.
mhm,
And they're right because, I mean, think about it. It's been 50 years now that they've nationalized their oil. I mean, that's how their countries run. Social
yeah,
services, healthcare, education, like they're not gonna that's one of the things with Cuba. Like they want to get rid of all that if they overthrow the Cuban government. And Cubans are like, no, dude, nuh-uh. We're
mhm.
not interested in any of that. So yeah,
What
it's
you
just go ahead.
you're no, you're kinda seeing that I think with what's happening with America right now, because like, this whole cutting government is the answer. Because again, nobody likes government waste, right? We all kind of like,
Right.
it's you're not a fan of that, like, "Why am I paying for this?" And even though corporate subsidies far and away, are more expensive than anything with, like, SNAP or food stamps, whatever, any social services we do, but I digress. But we've cut it to such a point now, starting under Clinton, that there's nothing left to cut. And so, just like I mean, we started before the live. I was talking about the weather stuff, and my dad was worked for the National Weather Service and NOAA, and my weather forecasts here have been terrible. Right? I'm like, oh, there's no snow expected all week. 2 days we've had snow, and it didn't used to be like that before all the Doge cuts and everything else. And I remember when I was organizing in East Tennessee, there was a guy, he told me something very profound once. He said, a lot of these people, they don't understand what life was like before we had all these things.
Yeah.
before we had the rural health clinics, before we had the Tennessee Valley Authority, before we had all these government services. And if it comes to pass, they're going to feel their absence, you know, and
Yeah.
that's, and to your point, Venezuela has had 50 years of this, like that is, it is now the culture.
Yeah.
Right? It's not politics anymore. It's the culture. And
Yeah.
so when they, when, if you were to go in and just start stripping it all out, so you could be more profitable or whatever, give it to corporations, people are going to feel some kind of way about it, especially if it's, they know you're foreign backed.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and Machado, she copied what Javier Milei did. She kept saying she wants to privatize everything. Those were the words, privatize everything. And, you look at what Milei did and look at Argentina's situation right now economically isn't great. You
No.
know, Argentina has 5 million people with no proper access to running water or electricity. So why are you cutting these services? Now you're costing those people more money. They cut subsidies to all those poor people for fuel and for groceries and stuff. So now they have to pay more for everything, and they're already living with no electricity. So,
Right.
the efforts to bring the rural electrical or the urban electrical grid into the rural areas has been an ongoing thing in Argentina for like 10 or 15 years. And, Malay's cutting funding for all that stuff too. So, you can't tell a population that relies on universal healthcare that you're gonna privatize it, right? You're
Right.
not you got your Subway's gonna go from 50 cents to $5, all because somebody wants a cut. And, that's how people see it. They don't dig too deep into that because you don't have to.
No.
You look at it like, if you privatize my Subways, then all of a sudden my Subways are gonna cost 10 times more. I don't wanna do that, right?
Well,
So, it's just weird to think that because like you were saying, it's not just part of the culture in Venezuela, it's the culture in Latin America because everybody there has universal healthcare. Even far right governments have healthcare. So, yeah,
you
it's a
can
cult.
you can research it even in the United States in the South, right? For places that did not have running water and electricity if before Tennessee Valley Authority,
Yeah.
before those rural electrification projects that started happening under FDR and continued through the liberal consensus, right? Poor Appalachia, where it's,
Yeah.
and I mean, dude, Hall of Famer Denver Bronco tight end Shannon Sharp talked about he and his brother Sterling growing up in Georgia,
Oh, yeah.
and they didn't have running water in their house, right? They had an outhouse and they would, take baths in the metal tub out on the
Yeah.
porch, you know, and he's not much older than me.
Right.
And so it's, to act like it's like, oh my gosh, they don't have this and they don't have that. Those poor people. It's like, okay, the grid went down in winter in Texas a few
Oh,
years
man.
ago, and
Yeah.
they had boil water advisory, you know, because Texas isn't hooked up to the national grid.
Yep.
And so it's before you start like looking at South America and saying, "Oh, well, look at we've got to give them infrastructure." It's like we don't have infrastructure where it
Yeah.
should be in rural areas.
Yeah. Yeah, like,
That's
I get a lot of grief 'cause I'll pretty much have a Cuban flag on, like, all my social media profiles,
yeah,
and I always put the Cuban and then the American flag to signify Cuban American, most people don't get it. But
yeah,
anyway, they're like, "Oh, how's the electricity in Cuba?" And I'm like, "Honestly, I'm in Texas, bro, and, it's not great." So,
right,
yeah, we had a few weeks ago, we had a mild freeze, it was like 30, and the next day, our power was nonstop, on and off, on and off. You hear transformers blowing up over here, it's like, Jesus Christ, don't ask me about electricity in Cuba because 'cause I'm about to go off about Texas, you know what I mean? Like, what the
right.
fuck?
Well, and as someone in the chat just pointed out, Rachel, I think Rachel and Keith, we get a lot of our power from Canada
Yeah,
too,
yeah,
right? So we get power from Canada. They're like the Canadians, like, there you go, bro. like, like, and y- you this because corporate interests and private interests are not they don't care to build something. They just want to extract the profit
Right.
and enrich themselves. I mean, I know Obama got a lot of flack for this, and everybody, when he said you didn't build that, and it was one of the more profound things that he said. It's like, no, you didn't build that infrastructure. Taxpayer dollars did.
Right.
We paid for it. Like, we just hired you to build it, and you got paid a wage to do it. But
Right.
we raised, it was taken from us, the taxpayer, and then we paid you.
Yeah. That was the same with the phone systems, right? We had Ma
Right?
Bell as a kid, we had Ma Bell. Everybody had a Bell something, Bell South, we were in Jersey,
Yeah,
everybody
100%.
Pacific Bell, Southern Bell, all that stuff. And it, they decided to splinter it off and sell it off and they gave it to corporations. And I'm like, but wait, we built that.
Right.
Why are you giving it away?
No, no, yeah. And I mean, you look at what the Koch brothers did to Wisconsin
Mm,
with Scott Walker and
yeah.
privatizing, their electrical grid for pennies on the dollar that those
Yeah.
folks had paid into. And one of the best public education, higher education systems in the world is now just, yeah, because of what the right wing has done, destroying that state.
Yeah. And
And
that's part of it too, right? Cripple the education system.
yep. Because again, if they say, "Oh, it's communist," oh, well, I guess we got to go to Venezuela now. Like,
Yeah.
it's like we got to go to Greenland. Why? Cause
Yeah, 'cause right, there's still no justifiable reason
no, it's
whatsoever.
like it's well, we got to. It's like, well, we got to go because of national security. It's like you literally abandoned a military bases that they let you
Yeah,
like have. So I'll try another one.
yeah,
And I think they finally just gave up and said, "We just want to take their stuff."
yeah.
Like,
I mean,
okay,
pretty much.
I guess that's our foreign policy now is we just want to take their stuff.
Yeah, yeah, I
Like,
mean, when you look at, Trump's version of the Monroe Doctrine, and I know, it's been getting some talk lately, the Monroe Doctrine has, and that people been calling Donald Trump's little update to it, the Donroe Doctrine. But yeah, that's what it is. It's about just taking control over all of Latin America, and they're trying to add Greenland into that. Um, yeah, I don't know. The Greenland thing still throws me off because it just doesn't really make sense. Especially I don't know, military spread thin or the Navy spread thin. We got this carrier groups in the Caribbean. Now we got to send some. Where was it? Over towards Iran. So yeah, I don't know how they're planning to do any of this when they spread our navy so thin like that. It just I don't know.
I
Strategically, it's
I
stupid.
I think it's just it's a fantasy where they wanna have this they probably saw Man in the High Castle,
Yeah, something.
and they
Yeah,
yeah, something like that where it's just they want, North and South America as our sphere of influence, and then, Russia can have whatever, and then China gets this and they divide the world up into thirds.
it's almost what it
But
feels like.
no, I mean, that's the delusion. That's kinda that's because again, we're dealing with people that just like the Dark and Light Admin and Curtis Yavin and all this, it's this fantasy kind of stuff that's not grounded in reality. And, it's funny, like even with the history of the Monroe Doctrine, when Monroe issued that, the rest of Europe was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, whatever, bro."
Yeah,
Like it was fanciful, right?
yeah,
It was sort of just it was kind of an embarrassment because like there's no way we could pull that off.
right,
Like dictate to powerful European countries that had way more military than we ever thought about, like what they could and couldn't do in South
right,
America. And it really didn't it was just, it wasn't until the Roosevelt corollary and Spain was waning as a world power that we decided to go, you know what, let's dust this off as like precedent, to
yeah,
make it more legal seeming. and then we're going to say, well, because of the Monroe Doctrine, we can do what we want,
Right.
right? And that's where the quote unquote big stick diplomacy came for, which was just a nice way of saying we're imperialists now.
Right.
Um, and I mean,
Yeah.
even some of the crazier stuff. I don't know, like so part of the term filibustering. I don't know if you know this, but there was a guy named Walker Percy, and he was a Confederate. And part of the answer to spread the institution of American slavery was he went and took over Panama for about a year in like the late 1850s, like right before, like 2 or 3 years before the Civil War kicked off, and wanted to make it a legitimate, like he wanted to make it a slave state. Because the reasoning was like, well, we can't expand Western America, so we'll just take over Panama and we'll turn it into a slave state, and then we'll get into the United States, and that'll give us more representation.
Yeah.
But it lasted about a year, and they ran his ass. They killed him,
Yeah.
right? But like the term for that at that time was called filibustering. You know, when you got a bunch of Confederates that were going to go down to South America, and set up a slave state. And yeah, it's what his name's Walker Percy. You can look him up. Like, like the plot to pull Cuba away from the Spanish crown,
Right.
before the Spanish American War.
Right.
That was before the Civil War. They wanted to turn Cuba into a slave state before the Civil War. Same kind of thing. They wanted to filibuster down there. And so it's you look at I look at some of the parallels in South America. I'm like, this seems awfully familiar.
Yeah.
I've seen this before. You
Right.
know?
Yeah. Like racism and stuff, and this idea of white supremacy and all that. It can be just as big of a problem in Latin America as it can here.
Mhm.
And it comes from colonization and stuff.
Yep.
Um, but like you talk about both of these cases that you just mentioned, the whole Panama thing and Cuba thing is funny because there's Simon Bolivar, right, liberated Venezuela, like 9 different countries in Latin America,
Yep.
and helped lead the push to abolish slavery. He was funded by the Haitians, all that stuff. And, in the middle of that, you have Confederates thinking they're going to go down there. Right. And there's this
Right.
huge territorial, like massive regional war happening. And like, you got to be stupid. Right. And then, you have Simon Bolivar who spoke out a lot about US imperialism. And that's one of the reasons why, because you had Americans coming down there trying to take different countries.
Yep.
And, 200 years ago, he was warning about US imperialism.
Mhm.
Jose Marti, who led the fight to oust Spain from Cuba with the help of the United States in the late 1800s, also warned of U.S. imperialism. Like, they're gonna help us get the Spaniards out, but we're not gonna let them take over our country. Unfortunately, Marti was killed in battle, like at a young age, under 30. And but like most of these ideas, like these revolutionary ideas, have existed in Cuba for 150, 200 years, in Latin America because of Bolivar for a couple of 100 years, the Haitian influence. There's all these ideas, and they're Latin America's just built different in that respect.
Yeah.
When we talk about how they're aware of imperialism, a lot of it is because that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. No, you're right. Sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
no, no, no. Go ahead. I was. It's they consider Venezuela a Bolivarian state because of
Mhm.
that. Because so much
Yeah.
of its constitution is built on Bolivarian ideas.
No, yeah. It's funny because even American foreign policy, you really study it. Like, we had a chance to, like, at the end of the Spanish American War's done, and we're getting concessions, and we actually had a chance to snap up Cuba. And the administration was, I mean, even after like the American Civil War, there was a chance we could have bought it or whatever. And for whatever reason at that time, people were like, no, we're not doing it. We're not touching Cuba. It's too much of a problem. That like they didn't want it. But then there's Puerto Rico, and they're like, they died on the, like, Puerto Rico's like, we want to be independent. We don't want to be part of the United States. No, you're ours tough. Like
Right.
it was like they talked in two different ways. That was what was fascinating about this, because it's like with Cuba at that time, it was we liberated the Cuban people and they deserve a chance at democracy and they deserve to self-determine and be their own way. Puerto Rico's like, can we get that? No, your
Yeah.
territory, tough. Like, like,
Yeah, I mean,
what?
the US has essentially occupied Cuba since then.
Yeah,
And Cuba's really only had, like, 3 genuinely elected leaders.
yeah,
The rest were installed by the US or,
right.
they installed US citizens as presidents in Cuba, like, that didn't fly, but, when Batista got in there before Castro, the US was up his butt, bro. They gave him all the money, they gave him all the weapons, and he was a brutal dictator. Black, Afro-Cubans and indigenous Cubans and even the mestizo ones, the mixed Cubans, were all relegated to, like, the outskirts and the, rural areas, not allowed in the cities, couldn't use parks, couldn't use any public services or anything like that. And, fun fact about that, when Castro desegregated the island, a lot of the people who fled because of desegregation, not communism.
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
people don't because the US was still segregated when Castro desegregated the island. He did it like 6 years before. So Cubans, bolted, and most people haven't made this connection, but there's a reason why all of them were white in the '60s.
Yep.
1959, 1963, and, there's not a lot written about it, but I've found some research on it, and, yeah, there's a lot to the oral history of that, and it's just crazy. And when the same thing happened in Venezuela when Chavez came into power and the new constitution giving everybody all these rights, a bunch of white Venezuelans fled. The
Yeah.
rich ones were the first, same with Cuba, all the wealthy, then the middle class, upper middle class, then they started leaving slowly but surely trickling out. And, it like with Cuba, it wasn't until like 40 or 50 years later you started seeing Afro-Cubans and stuff coming across with very few exception. I mean, you had Celia Cruz who came early, but she was one of the rare ones. There wasn't a lot of Afro-Cubans that came in the early waves, unless they were rich, but aside from that,
Right.
yeah, it was nuts. It's nuts to see that when you look back and you try to find, like, real reasons for stuff, and because Castro wasn't a communist until, like, 5 years, 6 years later into his presidency. Like, he wasn't, "I'm not communist," "That's my brother, that's Che, that's not me." And then later
Right.
on, he ends up becoming a communist, which I always thought was kind of a funny story there, but yeah, it's just weird. And, you had Hugo Chavez who was like, they asked him if he was communist, and he was kind of a almost Christian nationalist, but he was
Yeah.
a socialist. Like, so a Christian socialist, I guess. It was weird because he didn't believe in the communism,
He might have
Marxism.
actually read the Bible and what Jesus preached,
Yeah,
That could
right, maybe so, right. But he
yeah,
he always gave him and Castro, like, I've seen a lot of conversation or read a lot of conversations about them back and forth. And, like, he used to rag Castro a lot for being an atheist, and, like, when you really dig down and, like, see who these people were and listen to what they had to say, they're just dudes, man. I mean, maybe they're
right.
not the greatest people in the world, but they're still pretty cool, like,
Yeah,
maybe yeah, I mean, they're just people. And, it's just funny to see, guys act like that who are supposed to be dictators, and they're these big, funny little pushovers.
yeah. I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
it's just for show, and it's,
Yeah, of
it's
course.
like pageantry in theater. I think what's interesting for me, man, is like I grew up in Hawaii when I was a kid. Like I was so like 1st grade to about 5th grade, and my dad what even though they could afford it, they didn't send me to private school. Like, he's from Mississippi. He's like, "You're just going to public school." So I went to public school. And the education I got on was, you get it on your state's history starting in about 4th grade, so I learned about, like, the colonial stuff that happened, when we went and toured the Queen's Palace, Queen Lokialani, and then, we got, like and the American sugar planters locked her up, and overthrew the government, and
Yeah.
then, wanted to and then handed the Hawaiian Islands over to the American government who didn't want them at first, and then said, "Nah, we'll take them." And I was like, "Man, they locked up the Queen? We did that? Like,
Yeah.
really? Like, wow, it's kinda shitty."
And
You know?
right, it's just that's that imperialism that we're still seeing today, and it's it's weird because, like, they arrested the queen and then they handed over the country, and I'm like,
Yeah,
you just described Machado, right? In Venezuela
that
and Marco
that's yeah,
Rubio. Right, right. So,
that's
like,
literally what happened. Is like it
same
was
shit.
yeah,
Same thing.
it was Queen Lokiolani, and like they kind of model the Hawaiians model it after their monarchy, like in structure after the British, right? Because that's who with James Cook, that's who they encountered first from Europe, was the British. And so the American sugar planters, came in, because sugarcane grew right
Yeah,
over there. And there was some issues like with, taxation and how they were treating workers and Native Hawaiians and everything else. And they said, oh, well, screw this. We're just going to overthrow the government. No. And they basically just stormed the palace and locked up the queen and forced her to sign a document to try to hand it over to the United States. Yeah. Because they were like, we're tired of the British getting preferential treatment. We want preferential treatment. So
yeah,
screw you. We're just going to take over the government. And they didn't know it was going to happen. It wasn't until McKinley was like, because, American government was just like, yeah, we're not really in the business of imperialism yet. And then when we started going that way with McKinley, which it was McKinley with Puerto Rico that wanted it.
yeah,
And, basically McKinley was like, yeah, we'll take Hawaii. Sure.
yeah.
We'll do
Why
it.
not?
Why not? And so but yeah, I mean, essentially it's the same thing in Venezuela. It's like you just kidnap the head of state and it's like, all right, sign this document under
Yeah.
duress. And
Yeah.
then, it's Greenland. Yeah, I think I have no idea like what they're trying to do there.
I don't
You
get
know?
that one either. I mean, again, somebody showed me this thing called the Technate, which was an idea. I don't
Yeah,
remember how far back. I haven't looked it up, but I haven't read it much into it. But it included like the U.S. having control over like Greenland, Canada, Latin America, things like that.
yeah.
And I thought, it's interesting because this is what they're trying to do, and you never know with this administration, right? Like you got Stephen Miller on in there, and he's running things based on the internet. How people react to things, what he sees, what he reads. And that kind of guy scares me. You know what I mean? Like Steve Bannon was that way. He scared me too because there's no telling what they might do next.
This is the fascinating thing about studying foreign policy. Is like the reason I liked it is because it's the merging of sort of like ideology and what's happening on the ground. And when you study the people that, um, like in China, for instance, how things go, you realize a lot of it is just through sort of their own quirks, and rarely is it sort of big picture and sort of like an understanding of culture. So like for Teddy Roosevelt, his Secretary of State was a guy named Philander C. Knox. And the reason he got the job is I think it was under McKinley, and that he was actually one of the best attorney generals we've ever had. Like the Sherman Antitrust Act and all that. Like he took
Okay.
on really big corporations because he was a lawyer, right? And he took
Mhm.
on these really big corporations at US Steel and everything else, and he broke up a lot of the monopolies. So then he becomes Secretary of State. He goes to China, and he has this what they called like shirt sleeves diplomacy. He's very adversarial, and he's dealing with foreign countries like he's an attorney, right? And it turned off a lot of the foreign countries because they do like I can't remember what the term was, but they like there was a certain way you do diplomacy. It's not adversarial, right? It's more about like having friendships and establishing relationships and doing that kind of stuff. And so he came in, he's like, well, the Americans want this and we want that, and here's what we're going to put on paper, and blah blah blah. And the people that had the spheres of influence were like, no.
Yeah.
and and he was a disaster, right? The open door really just as a concept kind of failed in our test of, because he said the open door was essentially just, hey, let's all just compete and have capitalism instead of these spheres of influence. And and all the other countries went, "No,
Yeah.
we're gonna like, we're already doing, like, our own version of old school imperialism. We're sticking with that." And it was funny, one of his secretaries, like, assistant secretary, um, actually had to be sent home because he got into a duel over a woman and killed a guy.
Oh my god.
Yeah, like, yeah, a diplomat who's just like, you
Yeah.
know, walking around with a gun was just like, and apparently it was over a woman and he fought it. He decided to fight a duel and killed a guy, and it was an international incident. So they said, "Yeah, all right, so we're gonna have to send you back home."
That's terrible, man.
Right,
That is terrible.
right. So
Like,
you read some of these things, you go, "Wait a minute, this was our foreign policy?"
right, yeah, that's crazy. That
Like, and like, Taft's greatest. You would think, right? What was Taft's greatest thing? He was the first guy for the Department of State to go, you know, instead of just handing these things out to people that want political favor, we should have a class of people that actually understand the country they're going to and can pass a civil service test to be a diplomat.
yeah,
Let We want a professional service corps of diplomatic people to go like that are educated and know something about the culture. And it was
yeah,
like, and there was a huge bunch of pushback for that when that happened. And that's why we actually have the Foreign Service Officers exam is because of Taft. Even
me
though even though Taft has said, "Yeah, let's just go down to South America and just run roughshod. Who cares what they have to say? I was in the Philippines and well, they're similar."
yeah.
No.
You know, when Marco Rubio went to Latin America, last year, I think it was February, he made a little tour, mostly all the right-wing places, but, man, it was a disaster,
Yeah.
and, he basically went down there with that attitude, "This is what we want, this is what we're gonna do." And most of these countries agreed to the same agreements that we've had since forever. They're like, yeah, sure, here, that's what we're gonna do. But yeah, right before he went, he had called so Cuba sends their doctors, right? Because they have so many doctors. They send doctors out to other countries. Other countries use that service. Um, and doctors go to rural areas and stuff like that. Marco Rubio had said a couple weeks before his trip to Latin America that any country that uses Cuban doctors, that those leaders are human traffickers, right? And he's arguing that Cuban doctors don't get paid, that this, that, the other. It's basically slave labor. He goes to Jamaica and they're doing a presser, and the Jamaican PM is standing right next to him.
Yep.
And man, right in his face, told him, "We are not human traffickers. Like, we don't appreciate that kind of commentary." Like, you see Rubio getting red and dude, like right in front of the whole world.
Yeah.
And, after this incident with Venezuela, I thought for sure Rubio was going to make a trip through Latin America, but instead the White House had to make some phone calls. And I was like,
Oh,
yeah, probably a good idea. 'Cause
well, that's what a lot of people really don't understand about like diplomacy, where it's like, okay, say you want to get, something done in Latin America, like say, you know, like Venezuela, right? In normal times, and it's like, all right, but you know, they're friends with the Cubans, and then those people are like, we don't have good relationship with them, but it's like they want more doctors. But I know the prime minister for Jamaica. All right, cool. Let me call the prime minister of Jamaica and see if he can make a call, and then to get more doctors over to from Cuba to Venezuela, and then. All right, what does the prime minister of Jamaica want? Well, he wants this. It's like, but that's coming from Ukraine. So I got to find someone who knows Ukraine. And that's
Right.
really what it is. So it's like to
Yeah.
do something in Venezuela, you might have to make a deal. It's like an NBA trade, man. Where they
Yeah.
have like these crazy trades, with like this team gets this and this is, and like Fred gets a slushy up in St. Louis for whatever reason, like it's just part of the deal, you know, and that's it. But these when you do this sort of roughshod cowboy diplomacy, thinking like, well, we're big bad Americans, they can do what we want. A lot of times it's like, no, we're not going to
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
You know,
It,
like
it,
this is like it's like to your point. the president in Venezuela now is like, cool, got the same deal for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and, like, they just
Yeah.
put 75 countries on that list, right, for to ban visas and stuff. Jamaica's on there, obviously, because they embarrassed Rubio. Basically, any of the Latin American leaders, which was
Right.
most, except maybe Nayib Bukele. But they also added a bunch of other countries on there that had nothing to do with anything, like Uruguay, right? They're a leftist government, though. So a lot of leftist governments in Latin America got placed on that list for no reason.
Right.
And I was having a discussion with somebody on notes earlier today, and I said, this is exactly how they rigged or they meddled into the 3 elections in Latin America this year, Chile, Bolivia, and Honduras. Trump essentially threatened those populations that if you don't elect my guy,
Mhm.
he literally used the words, "There's gonna be hell to pay."
Yeah.
He threatened ending economic partnerships. He threatened ending, like, remittances where, family can send money back home to those countries, and a lot of these countries, people depend on that money from their family here in the US.
Yep.
So he threatened them with all that stuff, and then, one election in particular in Honduras is still in question because there was some anomalies with the electronic system there. But in Bolivia and Chile, they ended up electing, more right wing leaders,
Mhm.
and it's not a stretch to think that that influence from the most powerful country in the region, who's blowing up boats in the water and threatening to go to war with Venezuela, and then he's telling you there's going to be hell to pay if you don't elect the guy.
Right.
Yeah, of course, that's going to influence an election,
Of
and
course it is.
it's technically illegal under international law, but there's no law in the U.S. preventing him from doing that.
Right.
Of course, right?
Of course. Right. And I mean, for a lot of folks that like, you know, I got an interesting perspective like when I worked in aviation. So I worked with folks from all over the world, especially
Yeah,
at DCA. I worked with folks that were from Africa that would go back and forth. Right. I had guys that I worked with Eritreans, I worked with Ethiopians, I worked with, I mean, you name it. And I mean, you're talking about guys that would work like they would swap out shifts and they would work like just back to back days for months, like, hey, I'll swap this shift for you. Like they would sleep at the airport, right? Go upstairs,
yeah,
sleep in a terminal, shower in the mechanics shop, you know, and just like maybe get like a hotel room once a week so they could do their laundry and everything else. And then like you wouldn't see them for 2 or 3 months because they go back home, right? Or when I was at Philly, the flight to Puerto Rico to San Juan was always our heaviest flight, and it was because of bags. Because everybody that would fly back there would load up their bags.
hmm.
I mean, you never had so many heavy tags in your life, like bags that weighed 70, 80 pounds, right?
Wow.
Huge. And the other fascinating thing about that flight is a flight attendant, if you didn't know this, you would take a delay. They wanted double or triple the coffee and cream allotment because nobody wanted sodas. Like it's like I guess it was a Puerto Rican thing. Everybody wanted coffee on the flight.
Yeah,
Nobody wanted soda, right? And so the flight attendant would be like, "You only gave me one compliment of soda. This is going to San Juan. I need at least 2 or 3. Tell the caterer to
yeah,
come." So it's, but again, reason those suitcases were heavy, they're bringing stuff back to Puerto Rico.
yeah,
I work with a guy in New York, was from Antigua, and he would make the trip like once every couple weeks, and he was an air like he would take as many bags as he could, take stuff down to the islands, give it to his family, come back and go to work,
yeah,
you know. And to your point, right? People work in the US, they send money home.
yeah,
They literally are supporting a family back there.
yeah. A little goes a long way too in a lot of these countries. You send $100 to Cuba, that probably lasts them all month.
Yeah.
Buy them food for a month. So yeah, a little bit goes a long way. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, threatening to take that stuff away from countries, from the population and stuff. Absolutely, rigged the elections. I try not to use rigged, but it's basically what it was. But
You can
another,
use I like I you can use. I mean, essentially, it's he put his thumb on the scale
yeah,
and threatened the populace. He strong armed the people through fear of violence and because again, we have a history of that in the United States of doing exactly that.
yeah,
Where if something doesn't go our way, we'll come in and I mean, and you're seeing that play out with him kidnapping Maduro and his wife,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know? And so
Yeah,
and but
you mentioned Puerto Rico real quick, and you were talking about how everybody's bringing stuff back. It made
yeah,
me think of, I believe it's the Jones Act that, basically, if you wanna ship anything to Puerto Rico, it has to come to the US first and then go to Puerto Rico, and a lot of times, ships coming from the other side of the world have to pass by Puerto Rico to
yeah,
come to the US first
yep,
so they can go, yeah, and Puerto Ricans pay for that. They pay
they
for all
do.
that extra fuel, that extra labor. The dock workers move it from one ship to the other for no stupid reason. No reason, and there's these weird things, man, and it's you don't wanna make Puerto Rico a state, but you wanna profit off of everything that comes and goes, and, it's just, when you look at a lot of times lawmakers will talk about Puerto Rico's debt to the United States, and I feel like that's a slap in the face.
It
Like,
is.
to Puerto Ricans, that has to hurt. 'Cause, like,
No,
the
yeah,
US already exploiting the country, and now you wanna tell them they owe you money? Like,
right.
come on, man.
Yeah, no, it is a slap in the face, and there's no reason to keep the Puerto Ricans, like, strategically, economically, we lose money and it hurts us by how we treat Puerto Rico instead of
Yeah,
actually just treating it like it's just another part of the
absolutely.
United States.
Yeah,
And the only reason that once you start thinking like, "None of this makes any sense," it does if it's racism, because
yeah.
that's the only thing you're really left with is racism. It's like, "Oh, because they have Spanish surnames and they speak Spanish," and
Yeah, I mean, when you look at how this is why a lot of the times I always refer back to Christian nationalism behind this racism, dominion type thing over Latin America is, you go back all the way back to Manifest Destiny,
yep,
and, that was the idea, in case people don't know, Manifest Destiny is the idea where the white folks in the US thought they had, um, um, the word, God had given them the right to take over the country. Divine providence. Thank you. I went blank. They had divine providence to take over the United States, and therefore, the Indians were the savages.
mhm,
And, anytime it's just like anywhere else in the world, when the indigenous people fought back, they were the terrorists, right? Not the
mhm,
white folks who were terrorizing everything. This is the same thing with when you look at the Monroe Doctrine, you look at the history of colonization when it was the Catholics and the Spaniards and all that stuff. This is essentially the same thing. It's the Protestant version of
yep,
Catholic colonization of Latin America and stuff. So, this idea, I've even heard people mention that we should extend Manifest Destiny to Latin America. And I'm like, you realize there's 700 million people down there who are going to oppose this, right? Because you're in for it. Like the people in the US, a lot of people don't realize it too, that the population in Latin America is twice as big as the United
yeah,
States. And, they're even the right wingers down there and the far right people have leftist ideas, for some things. So, not everybody's going to accept our way is the only way. Like our democracy isn't the only type of democracy. There's, I don't know, people refer to Venezuela's democracy as a direct democracy because the
mhm,
population has so much input, whereas we have a representative democracy. And I get that. The same thing people say that about Cuba too. A lot of Cubans there say, that they have a direct democracy instead of a representative one. And they do. I mean, they still have a legislature, they still have their representatives. But a lot of the times when representatives can't decide on something, they just let the people do it.
right,
And yeah, and so that's kind of where that direct democracy goes. You kind of lose it when you get to the leadership structures
mhm,
and things like that. Like there's always going to be something.
yeah,
But yeah, I think one of the reasons why I've seen Breakthrough News did an interview in the poor areas, a poor neighborhood, black community in Venezuela, and they asked them about overthrowing the government, and they said they weren't interested in that, but they were more interested in reforms.
mhm,
And this is the same in Cuba. They say the same thing. because the Constitution represents them. They have a voice, they have a representation. And while things may not be good now, at least they're seen where they weren't seen before. You
Right.
hear these same things in Cuba, you hear these same things in Nicaragua and a lot of other countries. And I think it's just it's one of the reasons why we get this different viewpoint, this different perspective is because our media in essence lies by omission, right?
Mhm.
There was a lot of things like when I got into journalism after I had a stroke, because I used to work, I was a FEMA contractor, and I worked at, with DHS and all that stuff. And when I started getting into this, and I took all the journalism courses and stuff, and I started working with a bunch of people and some folks that worked like at MSNBC and stuff like that. I was trying to get into some corporate media places, and like the thing was like, we can't talk about this, we can't talk about that, and I'm like, that's important context, and we kind of need it,
Right.
if you really want to tell the story. And so, like, I started like really drifting away. I know a lot of people in legacy media. I've worked with a ton of them, and there's a lot of great people there, but
Yeah.
reporters aren't necessarily in control of the final product, that
No.
comes out. So, yeah, I didn't like that either. So, yeah, when you talk about Latin America and things, and when you add these contexts and these viewpoints, um, from the other side of the conversation, it really changes how we look at it. You may still not like the idea of communism. You may still not like the fact that the Cuban government or the Venezuelan government is what it is. But at the end of the day, you'll come away realizing that that's what they want,
Right.
not me. It's crazy because it really starts to show that it's not about communism or socialism. When, like you mentioned, Vietnam earlier, we
Mhm.
do tons of business with Vietnam. We
Yeah.
do tons of business with China. Those are communist countries. Yes, they have a more capitalist type of economic system, but in the end, it's socialist. Most of the money goes to the people. And when you look at it like that, it makes no sense why you wouldn't do business with Cuba.
Right.
They say like US farmers have been trying to do business with Cuba forever. And I've seen different estimates that the US farmers and the economy in the US in general loses somewhere between like 8 or $10 billion a year by not doing business with Cuba.
Yep.
And instead we're spending like hundreds of millions to enforce these sanctions that make no sense.
Yep.
So, like, yeah, I think, we're selling ourselves short by saying you can't have that kind of government. I mean, who are we to say that?
Well, and again, it comes down to like a good buddy of mine who's passed away years ago, like a decade ago. Ches Pazienda said basically we still have these uh sanctions in place in Cuba because of a bunch of old men in Miami, that are still remember, but Batista or who uh,
Mhm.
and even further, it's like you got a bunch of guys that still want to wave the Confederate flag and remember that crap, and that's why we still have all these, like we can't get to egalitarianism with black folks and people of color and all that other shit. Like we're tearing down Confederate monuments is somehow was a big deal when it's like, well, they were put up for the. It's like, no, man, they were put up for terrorism for Jim Crow. They were put up
Yeah.
at the beginning of the 20th century. Now that's why they were put there. And you again, there's no reason for us to there's no reason for us to not do business with Cuba or because it's literally like it's not that far away.
Right.
Now, it's like, no, we want to do like let's do more business with China. China's all the way across the Pacific Ocean,
Yeah.
right? Cuba's right there, you know, and so are all these other countries, you know. And if we just if we literally just said, we're going to take all this off and, we're going to just get rid of the Jones Act, get rid of this, to get rid of that,
Yeah.
like you get an economic boom just from that, just from your for your farmers, right?
Yeah. Big
And
time.
then you're talking about travel, like,
Right.
and opening that up and everything else. It's like, you talk about shared prosperity because we're freaking neighbors.
Right, right. Cuba, the Cuban government recently in the last decade or so has been working with a Spaniard corporation that's building hotels down there. And, Cuba maintains a majority ownership of those and pitches in on building them, but there is room for private industry down there.
Right.
Recently, this last year, private businesses surpassed revenue wise, surpassed the Cuban government for the first time. It's like there are 51% of the people employed in the country, or 52% own private businesses and, don't rely on the government much. So, there's these things that like there's reforms, economic reforms, and China came to Cuba basically telling them, look, dude, do what Vietnam did, and open up your economy the way they did, and you can still maintain the society the way you have it, and that's kind of what Cuba's been trying to shift to. Um, and there's opportunity there, and it showed when Obama lifted sanctions how quickly that impacted the Cuban economy positively, and he only lifted the sanctions that he could, because some of these sanctions are legislation that was, voted on in Congress. So,
Yeah.
he can't just override that, but he did lift a lot of them, lifted the travel restrictions, and that just made a huge difference for Cuba in just a couple of years. And then in comes Trump, takes it all
Yep.
away, put in the maximum pressure camp sanctions, and suddenly 700,000 people leave Cuba
Yep.
because there's no all the access they had to stuff went away. Um, and everybody's quick on this end. Everybody's quick to blame the Cuban government,
Mhm.
but and some of the people that leave Cuba will inevitably turn on the Cuban government. Some of them feel like they have to because they're in the U.S. They can't be communist, right? And they run that risk. They don't want to say anything, and others just end up turning on them for other reasons. If you're in the Miami area, it's inevitable they're going to
Yeah.
brainwash you to shift your views. But like, I'm a Jersey Cuban, so like the Cubans the Cubans that live in Jersey grew up in Union City. Union City was called Havana on the Hudson when I was a kid because it
Oh,
was
okay.
so thick Cuban. Wasn't as many Cubans, but it was thick, like really dense. And it's funny because like the Jersey Cubans are the ones that don't want to deal with the racism, the bigotry, the fascist type things where they in Miami they want to go to war. They want civil war. They want all these things that Cubans on the island are just not interested in.
Yeah.
Like they're like, we're not going to war. We're not overthrowing the government. You can forget about all of that. We're not doing that. And that, I think that's funny. I read a recent report about that, how that support has never been there. And I've seen some of the declassified documents in the first few years from the State Department, um, about Cuba. And they were talking about how there was zero support for overthrowing the government. And like, it's still like single digits. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Nobody's interested in doing that, but all the white Cubans that fled in Miami are really, really hell bent on it one way or the other, and I just
It's
it
that
just does.
it's that delusion, man. It's like
I
here,
get it.
yeah, it's like, the maggots here and all that, where it's just if we just go conservative far enough, then we'll
Yeah.
reach this place where America's the shining city, and it's like, no, dude, like it's delusion at this point,
Yeah,
and it's just part of it's just human behavior where it's like, man, just let it go, it's like the Cuban
yeah,
people, like for the most part, they're okay. Like they'd be fine if we just literally just stopped depressing and just open it up.
yeah.
Just say, yeah, we're
I
good.
mean, that's basically what it is. Like, we've heard a lot of our high-ranking government officials and, advisors and stuff like that, like John Bolton and Elliot Abrams, and, we've had some of our State Department people go on TV and on Spanish language TV and tell people, yeah, those sanctions are going to hurt the population. Yeah, that's kind of what they're intended to do. And I'm
Mhm.
like, you're sitting there telling them in Spanish that you're going to hurt them on purpose to try to overthrow a government. And, it's no wonder 2 million people left Venezuela in that first year of those maximum pressure sanctions.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you go down there parading around and telling people, yeah, we're going to make you hurt. We're going to make you go hungry, but it's only temporary until we overthrow this government. Here we are almost 10 years later.
Right.
and
Yeah.
the sanctions are still there.
Yeah. Still there. And it's just, it is, and that, and, you know, and the problem with this is really the cost that we pay for Christian nationalism and white supremacy, because think about all the resources that we put towards oppressing these people with sanctions, with this, with that, which could be used to open up more business, more opportunity, more economic. I mean, honestly, if you're like a right wing, I believe in the free market. Okay, well
Yeah,
then take off the sanctions, take off, just say, yeah, let them self determine, and as long as they're not Pol Pot in Cambodia or something like that,
right.
like,
Or
okay,
Pinochet, right, in Chile,
yeah, like,
right,
yeah, so
yeah,
they're not Pinochet, like, all right, well then, where we have to go out and stop like genocide, which we're not doing in Gaza, you
right,
know, I mean,
right.
so
Yeah, it's our all of our policy, foreign policy specifically is duplicitous as hell. You call Maduro a dictator, but you do business with Saudi Arabia. Like, I mean, come on,
yep,
man.
right,
So yeah, it's what's convenient. It's what makes money. You know what I mean? It's just I don't know. Human life and humanity, human rights, all that is just kind of a back burner thing for a lot of these
oh yeah,
policy people. Yeah, they don't
I
value
don't care,
human life at
yeah.
all. They probably enjoy watching the shit that's happening in Gaza. These
Yeah, or they don't, or if they tune it out, or they don't think about it, and
one
it's
or the
just,
other,
or
right?
it's happening over there. So I'm making money, so that's fine. And but I mean, yeah, and that's the problem we have is, we have and this from working in FEMA, and I know this from working with my dad, and it's like, the sad part is you have a lot of people in the federal government that get into it for the work. You know,
Yeah,
yeah, they want to make a living, and yeah, they want this other stuff, but I mean, people do it because they care about it.
yeah,
And if we had more of those people in our government, and our, not only as employees but in making decisions, where it's like, yeah, this is stupid, we shouldn't be doing this to the Venezuelan, we shouldn't be doing this to anybody, there's really nobody
yeah,
down there that we need to do this to, let's just go ahead and get rid of that and then open it up,
yeah,
and see what we can do. And then suddenly it's like, oh, the economy's growing, I wonder why.
right.
But that's the price, unfortunately, we have to pay for our ignorance and white supremacy, and, like, to your point, American dominion down there.
Yeah,
You know?
right. Yeah, again, it's a lot of what we get is just there's a lot things that they just don't include in the news. It's I call it lies by omission because essentially that's what it is. After they kidnapped Maduro, if you notice, all the media outlets are talking to Venezuelans in the US. Never
Yes.
once did they go to Venezuela because if they did, they would talk to somebody like Elizabeth Raven, who
Mhm.
are the vast majority of Venezuelans who are Chavistas. Maybe they don't like Maduro, but they still believe in their constitution. They believe in their government. They hope for better, try to improve things just like we are.
Yeah.
And Venezuelans are and Cubans and everybody in Latin America is as nationalist as we are about our independence too. They celebrate their Independence Day probably harder than we do, if that's believable. Everybody thinks we do everything the hardest in America. So, but no, I mean, Venezuela, like they really do cherish their independence, and that to think that you could starve 30 million people and then they're going to be your friends is just stupid. And then to think you're going to walk in there and they're going to treat you as liberators like they did in Iraq. Come on now.
They didn't
They're
even
going to
treat
fight.
us like liberators in Iraq.
Right, right. They're going to fight you. And another thing people don't understand, for whatever reason, right wingers in the US seem to think that Chavez disarmed Venezuela. No, dude, that's like one of the most heavily armed countries in the region. Like, maybe Colombia is probably more heavily armed, but that whole region, I mean, you got Sandinistas, you have all these different guerrilla movements. You know what I'm
Oh,
saying? Like,
yeah.
there's a lot of revolutionary forces off in the mountains and the jungles, and like you're just not gonna succeed down there, and I'm
And
pretty sure the United States knows that.
yeah, and you wanna give them a reason to shoot at you,
Right,
right?
right, and
Okay.
everybody people will be like, "Yeah, but our soldiers are so much better," and I'm like, "I'm pretty sure the bullet doesn't care who pulled the trigger. It's coming." one way or the other, right? Like,
Yeah, our soldiers are so much better. It's like, I don't know, man, the people that grew up in that country that know it like the back of their hand,
yeah, right. That's the advantage. That's the advantage.
right? Yeah,
They know
I'm
the
pretty
trails, right? Yeah,
some guy that gets there that can't speak to the locals don't like you, you don't know where to go. It's like, I don't know, ask those Russian guys that were thrown into Ukraine about how well they did,
yeah,
when
no kidding.
they were trying to advance, how that worked
Yeah.
out for them. And
And that, that's the part that kills me because, like, my brother was in the military when 9/11 happened. He was stationed in Okinawa. He was in the Marines. And, when it happened, we knew we were going to war. Like, by the end of the day, we knew we were going to war.
oh yeah.
Um, and he ended up getting thrown in Iraq. And they were the first 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines. They were one of the first to get into Fallujah, all that stuff. And, like, it really killed me because they had them convinced that they would be treated as liberators.
Yeah,
And, like, you're telling a lot of these kids, like, some white kid, 20-year-old from Kansas who don't know his hand, doesn't know shit, right? And he thinks he's gonna go 10,000 miles somewhere, and they're gonna be like, "Yes, invade my country." No, dude. Like,
right.
if you explained it to them like that you would never convince them that they're gonna be treated as liberators, and it kills me that we do that to our troops,
Mhm.
especially the youngest ones, because they
Yep.
don't know any better. They don't know any better.
No, I mean, even it was funny when I was in the Marine Corps in the '90s. I had a staff sergeant of my battalion when I was at School of Infantry, and he made a point one day to start like asking us about this battle or why we are here, and I was the one that was ruining his lesson because I was a history major buff at that time, and and I'm like, oh, I know, he's like, you shut up, right? So, and he started asking everyone else. He's like, all right, Poe's gonna shut the hell up, you all, and no one. He says, listen, one day you're going to be asked to potentially go and fight and die for the US government in some foreign land. Don't you want to know why you're there and why you're about to give your life and potentially your body? Don't you want to know why? And it turns out a lot of people don't.
Yeah,
They don't
because 'cause they're
want to know.
afraid of what they're gonna hear. Yeah.
Right. And that's why we do stuff like this, man. Is like that's why I'm on here is because, and that's why I appreciate your voice, man, is because there's just a lot of people that I mean, and we've seen, and I won't mention any names, but like you've got people that will like, they're like going after Trump or they'll go after this, but then when it comes to foreign policy, it's just like, well, let me carry water now. Let me just accept
Yeah,
the line.
yeah,
And the thing is, to your point with journalism, if you have lies of omission, you don't have news anymore. You have propaganda.
right,
Because if
right,
they're omitting that for a reason, it's to sway your opinion. It's no longer, "Hey, these are the facts. Let me give you the context and try to give you the most clear picture possible, and
right,
then let you try to make a decision about it where you line up." No, it's they're trying to sway your opinion.
right,
That's propaganda,
right.
and we have way too much of that in the US, man.
Yeah,
Way too
I
much.
did there's a lot of things, like, that I don't agree with, for example, with the Cuban government. The way they treat certain journalism or, you know, things like that. I mean, it's not that there's an outright, like, ban against speech against the government because I work with Belly of the Beast in Cuba all the time, and,
Mm,
they're publishing videos all the time where people complain about the government, this the economy sucks and blah, 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 It's when you start talking about overthrowing the government or violence or something like that, that gets you in trouble. But I did a story on a journalist, um, in Cuba a couple years ago, and, I ran into his wife on social media. I seen a social media post of hers, and so I reached out to her, and we became friends. We talked for a while, for a long time, and unfortunately, he's still in prison, and, he was basically thrown in prison because he filmed some people that were distributing flyers, anti-revolutionary type flyers, anti-government type stuff, and he happened to catch it. He filmed it. He posted it on YouTube. They accused him of being part of the whole thing, of trying to foment an uprising. accused him of having these meetings and all this stuff. His wife assured me none of that stuff happened. And, I've reached out to the Cuban government. I've tried to see, if there's any kind of influence I can have, or anything like that. And I still do to this day. It's been
Yeah.
like 2.5 years. And I still try to reach out to the government, like, hey, I'd like to know what he's doing. And, last time I talked to his wife a couple months ago, his health wasn't good. He's having like kidney issues. So, again, reach out to the Cuban government, like any way you could like let him out, put him on house arrest. Because most of the time, even though Cuba has a pretty decent sized prison system for a small island, most of the time when people get in trouble, they end up on house arrest.
Hmm.
They call it they call it a denial of liberty, and you're basically on house arrest. And I try to do that to no avail so far, but I'm just a guy, just a dude, and yeah, I know that a lot of organizations reach out, but I always
Mhm.
feel like certain organizations were very anti-Cuban, anti-government. The Cuban government probably like sees a email from them and is like, toss it to. I don't want to talk to those people. So I
Right.
figured maybe if I read, I've talked to people in government. Some people know me there. I thought maybe I could get in somewhere, and I really can't get nowhere. Nobody will even respond to that request. So there's issues like that I do have with the Cuban government, but again, these are my personal issues, right? Like I'm in the United States. I'm pretty fucking lucky in that regard as far as free speech goes and talking
Yeah.
shit about the president and you know what I mean? Like I could go all in if I want to and call him whatever the hell I want, but yeah, there's just you talk to the Cuban people, like I interviewed them, like Francisco, this photojournalist I work with went to Cuba a couple months ago and I published an article, it was exclusive. We talked to Cubans about life under the embargo and all these things. And like, yeah, they tell you all these problems with the country. And then they start reminiscing about Fidel Castro. And, they don't like the current president, but like, man, I really miss him. He cared so much more for us. And you're just like, I thought these people didn't want him to be their president forever. Apparently they did. You know what I mean? Like, what the hell? So yeah, it really when you show those interviews to people, like I showed them to my mom and she was in shock.
Yeah.
She was
Yeah.
surprised. She was surprised that it was still like that. My mom, when she was a teenager, she worked on the literacy campaign where they sent students out to rural areas to teach people to read.
Mhm.
She did that till she was, like, 16, and, so, yeah, she was part of that. My grandma stayed, she was a revolutionary, my mom not so much, but my grandma stayed there, she came to stay with us for the last 10 years of her life, and, like, she taught me a lot. She told me what to look
Nice.
for, she told me what to read, and, like, that's when really started opening my eyes, man. I was like, "Holy shit, this is, like, nothing what any Cuban or the US government has ever told me."
Yeah.
Like, everybody has this weird, one-sided, biased, and they hide it under the guise of anti-communism, but a lot of it is really just racism, and it's fucked up, dude. Like, it blows me away. It blows me away.
My dad told me, like, because I was raised, it's interesting because I was like, I remember one of my first memories was we lived in Prince George County, and I was about 4 years old. So this is like 1981, and, at that time, it's like white flight was starting. Prince George County, one of the blackest counties in America now, right?
Yeah.
And so my dad worked at the weather service, and it was considered sort of like not the higher end, right? Because that's where it was the hiring was a little more diverse and inclusive. And my dad, man, he just invite whoever over to the house, right? So we had a pool, we had a barbecue, and he had a barbecue for folks in his office, and um, so we had like it was nothing for me to have like see Hispanic folks, Asian Americans, black folks. And I remember like m- like we were having a barbecue, it was like where they put the speakers out, right? You know,
Yeah.
and my dad's playing like Waylon Jennings, and then Earth,
Yeah.
Wind and Fire would come on because somebody else wanted to play that, and he ran in and he got mad because like they call like our neighbor who was we found out like told me this later, who's apparently racist, called the sheriff's department on my dad, and they were out front writing down license plates, right?
No. Yeah.
And my dad got on the phone and called the sheriff, and I remember him threatening the guy, where he was basically like, "I'm so and so, I work in DC, and if any of my people get so much as a parking ticket, I will rain down fire and fury
Yeah.
on your ass." And it's it because my dad was from Macon, Mississippi, and, he told me, like, years later before he died, he's like, straight up, he's like, "Yeah, I was racist, but he got in the Navy, and he got thrown in the brig,
Hmm.
and he met some black folks in there, and then so to punish him, they put him in the mess, right, when he was on ship, right? So he and that at that time, even though, we're talking like 1958, right? So it's still heavily black. Like,
Yeah.
segregation's over. In practice, it's still kind of going on. And so my dad, who was a hurricane hunter and
Hmm.
weather guy, is working in the mess as punishment. And, he got that mess duty for a month. And then when the ops, like his commander came back to get him, he said, "No, I want to stay here." I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so but he said that was kind of his awakening moment as a guy from Macon, Mississippi, where he's like, "Oh, these people are just like me, right?" You know, and so that influenced how he raised us and how, he raised or my sister and myself, right? And how he went about uh basically living his life from there on out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, it's and part of like why I like to do these talks and why is like once you're kind of exposed to you get past the propaganda and the bullshit
Mm.
and you learn about how people really actually live in those places and you start hearing about other ideas, you're like, oh, like referendums and like farmers get to vote on
Right.
what directly affects them. Like, I kind of like that. I'd like to do that. That
Yeah.
sounds kind of cool, or like 50 cents to travel all over Caracas, like
Right.
subsidized public transportation. Like, yeah, okay.
Right. Yeah. I mean, uh, you don't necessarily have to have free subways, like
No,
try to do in New York or free buses or whatever. But, as long as you're paying the overhead, cover it. Nobody needs to profit, right? Just as
right.
long as we're break even and the system's operational and efficient, that's basically all you need. And, if your workers are making a good salary, they're maintaining the system, they're doing everything right,
Yeah,
it's kind of a no-brainer.
right.
But then you get to the US and just the water's just so muddy. You just can't see, there's so much noise, and it's just crazy to me that, you look at giving ICE $175 billion, right? They're talking about giving ICE another 10% in this appropriations thing.
Yep.
Cory Booker is talking about adding money for training and body cams. I'm like, "You're gonna give them more money? Are you kidding me?"
They
Like,
don't even spend the money right the way they got it now. They just
right.
go pocket it and take it, right?
Just m yeah. It's
You
it's it's redundant. I don't.
Well, yeah, and I mean, and that's the problem is I heard what he said and I listened to it, and if you're not reading between the lines, it and see its capitulation, it sounds reasonable. But the thing is like they are, my response to that is like, one, they purposely shortened the 5-month training period to 47 days, right? And the only thing you ever see with them is being on the firing line. So they don't take any like enforcement classes. They don't go through like, hey, here's the law, here's this, like
Right.
that. And the problem we have now is like, it's like, oh well, 5 months, boy, that's a long time. It's like Denmark and Scandinavian countries police go through, or in Germany is 2 years.
Yeah.
2 years before they could become police officers.
Yeah.
2 years. They got to get a degree first.
Yeah, like an associates or something, right?
Yeah.
That's what
And
we do
then they
here.
go through 2 years of training
Yeah.
before they're allowed to like do law enforcement. And so at a certain point, you look at it and it's like, no, they're doing the exact job that they were made to do, which is just be a Gestapo. That's it. That's what they were, that's what it's intended. It's not a bug, it's a feature. right?
Right.
The software is operating exactly as intended. You can't so training is not the answer.
Right.
The training that what they want is fine. Like,
Yeah.
you know, and the question you have to ask yourself is like, and again, who are we arresting? Hardworking people,
Yeah.
American citizens, people that are here legally and lawfully.
Right.
And even if they're not hurting anybody,
Right.
you know?
You also, you look at the agent that shot Renee Good. 10 years. He's military service. He
Mhm.
was former border patrol before he was an ICE agent. The guy had all the training. All
Yeah,
the training.
all of it.
He also filmed himself shooting her. What is a body camera gonna do? I mean,
Yeah.
he released the video on his own
He
for people to
switched
see it.
to a non-shooting hand.
Right,
It was in his dominant right hand, and he switched
right,
to a non-shooting hand so he could pull the gun, pull his pistol, and execute her.
right, and to your point about the agency operating as it should, you're right, because it was created on the heels of 9/11. Xenophobia, anti-Arab hate, Islamophobia was peak. The only people who wanted to work there were people who were quote unquote Arab hunters.
Yeah,
They had their little Al Qaeda hunting sticker on their truck. That's who went to work there. And at the end of the day, to do what Homeland Security, ICE, and all them do, they hire racists on purpose because you're not going to hire somebody who has compassion for the family that you're tearing apart.
yeah,
You want somebody who doesn't care or who probably enjoys doing it.
right.
And that's who they hire. That's who the agency is. No amount of training, no amount of body cameras, no amount of anything is going to change that. And there has been several studies and think tanks and all these people talking about how we need to get rid of DHS and they say maybe replace it with something. I argue we need to get rid of it and not replace it with anything.
Right.
Let the Coast Guard be the Coast Guard. Secret Service can go do what it used to do. FEMA can focus on what it needs to focus on. You know, get rid of border patrol and start with something different because you have all this tech at the border. You don't need 60, 70,000 agents these days. You have
No.
all this surveillance tech, all this stuff to track people that walking across the border. You could see them on infrared with a helicopter. You could track them. They get, you know what I mean? You don't need all that anymore. You revamp the whole thing, get rid of border patrol. Border patrol is the most violent agency under Homeland Security. If you look, I don't know if anybody's seen that the documentary on HBO Max, Critical Incident, Death at the Border, with Jen Budd is in that.
Yeah,
Um, and it shows you just how Border Patrol goes through and covers up crime scenes.
yeah,
When you see what happened in Minneapolis when they shot Renee Good, that's exactly what they did. They
yeah.
went in there and mopped up the crime scene. They were picking up bullet casings, they moved the body, they denied a paramedic or a doctor access. Like that's all the same thing the critical incident team for Border Patrol does. And you just see how the violence of Border Patrol is now infecting every other federal agency that's helping ICE, the DEA, the FBI, the ATF, all these agencies, even the Bureau of Prisons are helping ICE with these mass deportations. And when they see what these Border Patrol agents do and how they get away with it, all these federal agents are falling in line. You don't see a mass exodus from any one of these agencies. And
Nope.
that's because that's who these people are, right? And now they
Yep.
know how they can get away with murder. And
Mhm.
that's kind of why we are where we are. You have to like our military likes to say, we're going to cut the head off the snake. That's what happened when they took Maduro. We're going to cut the head off the snake. Well, let's cut the head off DHS's or off the snake by getting rid of DHS and all that. Because
I
at
mean,
least it,
yeah, it absolutely does. There's no I mean, I remember in, like, so when Enron when, if you remember in California when they were ripping people off, right?
yeah,
And, like, basically, they're ripping people off, like, now it seems quaint, like, it's pretty much legalized what Enron was doing back then,
right.
where they were just, charging people higher prices and, just hiking up, rates and everything else. They cost the people of California, like, 10 times, like, I think it was, like, 10 times more than all of the armed robberies, burglaries, grand theft autos, you name it. And that's when it opened up for me. It was like, oh wow, like the biggest thing that we sweep under the rug, who Trump pardons on the regular basis, is white collar criminals.
Yeah.
I don't like. I'm not concerned about the guy with his family who's fleeing across a desert and trying to get to America. I'm like, pick that guy up, give him some water and some food, and help his family, with some medical care, right?
Yeah.
It's the guys that they pardon that are stealing from senior citizens with fraud and Medicare, like that
Yeah.
stuff. It's the white collar criminals, of which I consider Elon Musk to be one of those,
Right.
right? Those are the people that are robbing us blind and killing our society, not the guy, not the immigrants coming in with nothing. You know, the guy who's walked all the way here from, a country that we helped destabilize.
Yeah. And
No, man.
that's the thing. Like, we made all these people, all these countries a promise, right? When we took their leaders and overthrew their governments, and then we don't fulfill that promise, and then you want to get mad when they come knocking on our door to collect, right? Like, you promised
Right.
me this. Well, since you couldn't give it to me at home, you can give it to me over here. You can't be mad at that. You can't be mad at that. You really
I mean,
can't.
seriously, who are these people they think that are coming, where it's just like, you know what? All right, I'm going to spend the next 4 months walking on foot so I can get to the United States and commit petty crimes.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah.
No.
No, that's just dumb to even think that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not, dude, we have gone over, but man, thank you
Yeah.
so much
That's cool.
for talking. Dude,
I've had a kid, man. It's been so hectic. Been having a
yeah,
hard
same.
time focusing, and I needed this, actually. I needed this, so
I did too. I was like, part of me was like, I had an incident with my dog where he got a little bit of hold of chocolate. I had to run him to the vet, and then I kind of missed the deadline here. But I've been like, is this fool going to declare the Insurrection Act on MLK Day? Like, I've just been like,
oh, man.
man, I don't want. I'm like, God, I don't want to talk about that. Just don't do that, please.
Yeah,
Like, it's like, can we just get through Martin Luther King Day without you acting a fool, please?
right.
And it's like Tuesday, you can start your stupid stuff again.
Yeah, give us the day. Come
Yeah,
on,
just give us the
day.
federal holiday.
Hell
And
yeah.
that may be why he did it, is like, I want to put out a statement. I actually served, it's a federal holiday. I don't like that, but you know what?
Yeah,
Fine. We'll wait till Tuesday.
yeah. That's funny.
We'll invade Greenland on Wednesday. Wait, I'm golfing. No, let's push back to next week.
You do that really well, man. That's pretty good.
I really wish I didn't. I want it to be just like, man, I can't do my Trump anymore. He's been dead for
Yeah,
10 years.
I could see why you'd welcome that. That's cool.
Seriously, man. Well, Arturo, bro, let's do it again
Alright, man.
sometime, man.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
And thank you for everybody showing up. Oh, before we go, where can we find you, man?
Man, on social media, I'm under the same handle, at Extreme Arturo. I'm normally Notes. Substack is my home, basically for social media posts. I might post something here and then cross post it everywhere else, but yeah, that's Substack's where I'm at most of the time. You might find me
Right.
on X starting trouble with Laura Loomer or something like that. But she hates me. I don't know. I don't know why she picked me, but she did
Laura
it.
Loomer?
Yeah, dude.
Wow.
I called her out one day on
Oh my
a
God.
tweet, and she went at me, and I got like 10 million views on that tweet, but it's been nonstop. Like,
Dude, nobody ever see, I'm jealous. Nobody ever goes after me. Like, I will
yeah,
call people out. They're just like, they didn't even block me. I'm like,
yeah.
damn it. Don't
Hey,
ignore me.
what's his name? Damn it, Andy something. Andy, no, he blocked me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, when he like made some veiled threat, and I'm like, I'm not so sure you want to do that to somebody who's formerly at DHS. I didn't say FEMA. I said DHS because it's technically true.
It
He
is true.
blocked me as soon as he saw that. So yeah, I like to mess with people sometimes, man.
Dude, I do too, man. Like,
Yeah.
but dude, anyway, it's been a pleasure,
All
man.
right,
Thanks for
man.
doing it,
Good,
brother.
bro. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. I'll catch you later.